In this video, I'm going to be talking about Last Epoch a little bit, which is an ARPG that's going from early access to full launch after 3 years. And we're going to talk a little bit about the game if you haven't heard of it before, and why it's something I think maybe you should have a look at if you're a fan of these types of games. Before we get into the video itself, though, big shout out to Last Epoch for sponsoring this video. If you guys are going to be picking it up or you haven't picked it up yet, you can use our link below to support the channel. So what is Last Epoch? Last Epoch is an ARPG in the same vein as games like Diablo or Path of Exile or something like Titan Quest, Grim Dawn. Those sort of games, if you know that genre at all, then you know sort of what you're getting into with Last Epoch. Now, there are a lot of differences in Last Epoch compared to those games, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about those in this video. But first, I want to talk a bit about kind of like the setting of Last Epoch. What is exactly Last Epoch? What does that mean even? And how I think this game is a little bit different than, some of those other ones I just mentioned. So Last Epoch has a big focus on different timelines and periods of time within the game world, and you are essentially going to be traveling back and forth throughout time in this game, seeing different locations in different periods of time, and you do that by traveling through time with something called the Last Epoch, which is an artifact that allows you to travel through time. It sounds kind of strange at first, and when I started playing the game, I thought, wow, this is going to be really weird, but it fits very well into the game, and they did a fantastic job of kind of making this happen, and it's really cool to kind of, see different locations and different periods of time. Now, beyond that, there are 5 classes and 3 subclasses per class, so you're going to be able to start the game as one of the 5 classes, and then after you progress the campaign a certain ways into the game, you'll get to choose one of 3 subclasses for that class. This is a permanent choice, meaning you will not be able to change this later. So it does give some definition to characters, and it's not like you can just constantly make any build you want with one character. If you do want to pick a different subclass, even from the same class, you'll have to create a new character and choose that subclass when you reach that point. And your build in this game is essentially made up of the skills that you choose between your main and your subclass. So you'll have a skill bar, and you'll mix some combination of these skills onto your skill bar, and you can use these, you can change these anytime you want. But that's basically going to make it up. So, if you are playing a mage, for instance, you'd have some mage skills on there maybe. And if you chose like Rune Master, like I did in this video, then you will, have skills on there from your Rune Master as well. And you can change these around anytime you want into a different build. However, to add depth to this, you can actually empower certain skills via a skill tree for those skills, and as you get higher level, more and more slots for these will unlock. But you'll basically drop a skill in there, and as you play the game, you'll get more points that you can drop into a skill tree for that skill that will further determine how that skill operates. And it can change, doesn't only add damage to it or duration or something like that, but it can also change the properties, the type of damage it does, the way it behaves in combat. So it's not only the skills that you put on your bar, but it's also how you use those skills with the skill tree, and you can obviously try out different combinations, see what you like, respec if you don't like it, slot different skills and try them out. So a big part of this game is trial and error on what you like to play and how you want it to play, testing different things out with, not only your class skills and subclass skills, but seeing like how the variations of them perform in combat, depending on what you've done with them in the skill tree, and then messing around with that can take hours and hours of time, and that's tons of fun, and probably is my favorite part about Last Epoch in general. I'm a huge builds guy. I love making builds for video games. You guys know that if you watch this channel at all, and this just allows you to tinker and test all different types of things. And once you start adding the gear into that, it gets even more interesting because maybe you get a really good weapon or a really good piece of armor that has some special effect on it. Now you want to go try it with a different version of a skill, and now you're messing around with stuff even more. So the combinations there are what really keep the game interesting, in my opinion. And the loot system in Last Epoch is kind of typical in some regards. They have a rarity system there that, would not be unexpected if you played any of these types of games before. And different base weapons and armor have different base properties associated with them, like their attack speed or damage, or, some special bonus that they will always have, will always be on those base types. So you'll be looking for, the items at endgame that have the base properties that you want, and trying to get good, bonuses on those items. And another thing that's a huge part of Last Epoch is the crafting system that they have in the game, which allows you to really customize your gear and tinker your gear into something that you want. I feel like Last Epoch has a huge focus on not just getting RNG drops, but also making items that you have into useful items. And that's something that I really appreciate. I don't want my loot to just be entirely RNG based, and the crafting system here kind of allows you to customize your equipment a bit so that even if you don't have the greatest stuff right out of the gate, you can still make it more powerful and you can still get off to a good start, or, go with the build that you want to go with while you're looking for that better gear and not have to wait for that specific drop in order to make it happen. And the way this crafting system works is that you're going to use shards, runes, and glyphs that you find throughout the game to modify this gear from the crafting window. And what these allow you to do is, for instance, you can add affixes to weapons or armor or something like that. Maybe give it a property it doesn't currently have to make it stronger. You can also increase the amount of bonus you gain from that bonus that it gives you. For instance, if something has like fire damage on it, then you can increase the amount of fire damage you get by improving it. And also you can change around the affixes, maybe remove one that you don't want and replace it with something else, or maybe you remove it and then put it on a different item. And there are also ways to modify this even further, but that crafting system is very easy to get into, and it also allows you to just tinker around with your build even more, as I mentioned, which is quite fun. And you can spend a lot of time in the game just using this system on, bits of gear that you get, because you're always getting shards, runes, and glyphs as you play the game. So there's a lot of, time you can spend doing that, and it's quite fun. And obviously this crafting system plays a huge part in the end game system because you spend a lot of time working on your gear. It's not something like Diablo where you just sit there and, it's either better or it's not. That's all you do with it. There are ways to make your gear better, and you're going to spend time doing that in this game, which I think, if you're someone who really likes to min-max your character, you would really appreciate. Now, Last Epoch has both online and offline modes, and you can make characters of each one. They will play separately. So if you're somebody who doesn't, want to be dependent on the servers to be up in order to play Last Epoch, you can make an offline character, or maybe just have one in case they're doing some maintenance or something and you can still play. But if you want to partake in, online play and co-op with other players, or, participate in the ladder, etc., then, you'll be able to make an online character or many online characters as well. So you kind of have your choice there, which is, I think, important. And beyond that, there are standard modes and hardcore modes. If you're familiar with any of the other ARPGs out there, you'll know kind of what hardcore means. It means if your character dies, then it's dead after one death. You don't respawn or anything like that. In this game, though, your character, if it dies on hardcore, will go to become a softcore character or a standard character. So it's not like dead permanently. It just won't be a hardcore character anymore, and you wouldn't be able to play on the hardcore servers with it. There is also a character found mode, which prevents you from partying with other players who have traded gear and trading gear yourself amongst other players. So basically everything that you find is yours, and you'll be playing with other characters that are playing the same way as you effectively. You guys won't be trading gear or anything like that. Everything that they have gotten on their character, they'll have gotten for themselves, and the same for you. So if you like that, you can also play that mode as well. And then lastly, talking a little bit about the end game of Last Epoch. I know end game is really important in these games, so we'll discuss that here. So the end game of Last Epoch has something called the monolith system, which is essentially an endless grind of instances that have objectives that just keep getting harder and harder and harder until you reach a point where you're going to do a very specific type of monolith instance, and you're going to keep doing, the randomized objectives of that type, and it'll just has no cap in terms of how difficult it can get. It'll just keep going. So there's something like that there. And these instances are kind of like the Nightmare Dungeons from Diablo 4. So if you're familiar with how that is, or maps from PoE, they're very kind of similar to that sort of content. So if you're familiar with those, then you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. Now, that's not the only endgame activity that you can do in Last Epoch. It's probably the main endgame activity, but it's not the whole thing. There are other things you can do. One of them is called Temporal Sanctum. And this is a specific thing that allows you to go through and complete it, and then you can actually affect your legendary gear in the game and improve them. So when you get legendary items periodically, you're going to go do this, try and improve them, and it's going to give you a bit of a break from that endgame grind. There are also endgame dungeons in the game that have unique bosses and, unique boss mechanics that you'll periodically find keys for doing the monolith system, and that will allow you to go do these dungeons. And they're pretty cool from what I've seen so far. I haven't done them myself personally, but everything I've seen gameplay-wise, they look like they're really good. I think there are currently 3 of them in the game, and I imagine that they will add more of these over time. And the last endgame activity is the arena. This is sort of like a wave after wave of enemies that just keep coming at you. So if you are a fan of that type of gameplay where you're just fighting hordes of enemies over and over, one after the other, you might enjoy that gameplay, and it just keeps getting harder and harder and harder. And this is a great way to test your build. For instance, like you can see how far into the arena your character can make it compared to maybe some other build you made, and that can kind of give you a sense of how strong your build is or not. A lot of times, people don't know how does my build compare to other players' builds, or how is this character compared to other builds. Obviously, you can kind of get a sense of it, how fast you're clearing enemies in the game, but sometimes just, seeing how far you can make it in the arena is a great way to test your build. And there's also a leaderboard for the arena too, so you can see how you're doing compared to other players out there, what they're using with their build, etc. And obviously, a big part of endgame as well will be tinkering with your gear, crafting, using the crafting system, trying to enhance the things that you had, trying to figure out ways to use the drops that you get in order to make the stuff that you have better. A lot of gameplay hours will be spent on that, which I think is great. So that kind of wraps up our video on the Last Epoch and kind of explaining what you can do in the Last Epoch and how it is. Obviously, you can play the game multiplayer too, so if you're a big multiplayer fan, that's there. But you get a sense here of like what makes the Last Epoch different from some of these other games. And if you like what you're seeing here, then you might want to give it a shot. As I mentioned, it's coming into full launch right now. So, it's been in early access for 3 years, and now it's going into full launch. So it's going to be completely polished. And if you haven't played before, now is a great time to pick it up. And what I really like about the Last Epoch in my time playing it so far is that the complexity is more than Diablo, but not as much as Path of Exile. Path of Exile is a very non-new player friendly game in my opinion, and Diablo is extremely new player friendly, but doesn't really have the depth that Path of Exile has. So this is a great middle ground in my opinion for players that find Diablo too simple, but Path of Exile too hard. So I think if you're one of those players, it's definitely probably something you should check out. Big shout out again to Last Epoch for sponsoring this video, and if you are going to pick up the game, if you like what you see, use the link below to support the channel.